If you've been following along with the Cypress videos each week, you know that we now have 3 different tests for the contact list app: an add contact test, an update contact test, and a delete contact test. But these are all happy path tests. When we are testing a real application, we know that sometimes users do the wrong thing. And when they do, we want to make sure that they get an appropriate error message that helps them. So we also want to create some negative tests. This week, we'll be writing 2 different negative tests. One that shows an error message when a user doesn't fill in a required field, and one that shows an error message when a user doesn't use the correct date format. Let's get started. The first negative test we're going to add is a test where we add a contact, but we have a required field missing, and we validate that the user gets an error message. Let's see what that's going to look like on the web. So if we go add a new contact, let's put in a first name, but let's leave the last name blank, and we can leave all of these other fields blank too because they're not required, but last name is required. So when we click the submit button, we get an error message that says contact validation failed, last name path, last name is required. Let's inspect this error message to see what ID it has, and it looks like it's got an ID of error. So we will use that when we are creating our test. So let's add a new test to our add contact file. And we're going to start the test in between these 2 sets of curly braces and parentheses. So right here. And we will say it returns an error when required field is missing. And then parentheses and an arrow and our curly braces. Oops, returns an error. Okay, so what do we need to do first? Well, first we're going to need to log in. So let's grab our login. We'll paste that in. Okay, and the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to click the Add Contact button so that we start adding the contact. Then we'll need to fill in the first name field because we wanted to have 1 required field filled out. And then we're going to leave all of the other fields blank. And then we're going to do the submit button. And finally, we're going to validate that we get the correct error. So we'll say CYGET, and then error is the ID of the error message. And then we will say should contain, and then we'll just put in some of the string that shows the error message. So we'll say contact validation failed, and then we'll say last name. Okay, and that should be all we need for our test. So let's run our test. But before we do, let's go up here, and I'm going to show you a little trick to stop running another test, because we don't want to have to sit through the add a new contact test before we see if our returns and error test is working. So the way that you cancel running a test is just by putting an X in front of it like that. So now we will do npm run test. And let's run our add contact spec file. You can see right here, it skipped the add a new contact test. And look at that, it already ran and passed the test. So we can see that it logged in, and then it went to add a new contact, And then it added the first name, but nothing else. And then we got that error message. On your add contact test, you could add a whole bunch of other validation tests. You could add a test where you were putting in the last name and leaving the first name blank, and then making sure that you got an error. Or you could also do other validation tests, which is what we're going to do right now on the update contact screen. Let's go to the web page so we can see what it is we're going to do next. So the next test we're going to run is we're going to edit a contact, and we're going to put in an invalid birth date and see if we get an appropriate error message. So let's just click on any contact to edit it. And then we will click the Edit Contact button. And now let's take a look at the date of birth. We can see that the date of birth is supposed to be year first, and then month, and then day. So what if we put that in wrong? What if we said 01/02/2000 like that? And then we hit submit. We will get this error message. Validation failed, birth date is invalid. And if we inspect that, we can see that the ID is once again going to be error, so that should be easy to get to. So let's go over to our update contact. And in between the end of the first test and the end of the file, we're going to add in our new test. So we will say it returns error when birth date validation fails. And then a comma, then empty parentheses, then an arrow, and then the curly braces. So as always, the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to log in. And another thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add a contact, because we want a contact to edit. So we will add that as well. But notice what we need here. We're going to need that random number, because we're going to want to be able to grab the contact that we just added to edit it. So let's also get our command here to create the random number. And we'll put that in right here. Okay, and then after we've added the contact, what do we need to do next? Well, we need to find the contact and click on it. So that will be just like this test. So we'll say CY contains test plus random plus user, click. And then we will click the edit contact button. So let's copy those things. And now this is where we're going to make a change. So instead of doing all of these editing of all of these fields, we are just going to clear the birth date field and add in an invalid birth date. So let's put that in here, and let's change the birth date so that the year is at the end. And then we will click the submit button. Let's copy that. And then let's assert on the error message. So we will say cy.get error should contain, and then we'll just say birth date is invalid, because that's part of the text right there. Okay, so let's run this test and see if our assertion is passing. And just like we did in the add contact file, let's just put an X before this first test so that we don't have to sit around and watch it run. Now let's run our update contact test. And we can see that it skipped our update a contact test, but it ran our returns error when birth date validation fails. and our validation test passed. So there's one more thing that we need to do with our edit contact test, and that is we need to make sure to delete the contact that we just added. When we did our add contact validation test, we wound up not adding a contact. But when we did our update contact validation test, we did add a contact. So let's make sure to delete it. So if we go back to our web page and we see that the validation has failed, the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to click the cancel button to get back to the contact details page. And let's look up what the ID for that is. It's just cancel. That's easy. And then we're just going to want to click the delete contact button. And we've already got a method for that, so we can add that method in. So after we validate our error message, then we're going to click on the cancel button. And then we can just run the delete contact command, and it will delete the contact for us. So let's go back to Cypress and we'll run that and we'll see if everything runs okay. And it looks like we deleted our contact okay because it took us back to the contact list after it was deleted. So let's think about some other tests that you could run, other negative tests on the update contact page. You could, once again, try to edit the contact and leave out a required field like first or last name, or you could put in an invalid email or an invalid phone number, or you could put in a field that was too long. There are lots of ways that you can do some negative testing with your end-to-end tests. Next week, we're going to learn about element locators, so we know how to find elements if they don't have an easy access ID. Thanks for watching this video. If you found my training helpful, please like this video and share it with others. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single lesson. If you're enjoying Monday Morning Automation and you'd like to learn even faster, be sure to check out my book, The Complete Software Tester, which is available in Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com.